Omaha, Nebraska in 1919 was a city split down the middle. On one side stood a booming industrial center, full of stockyards, factories, and new arrivals chasing opportunity. On the other side stood a deep racial divide that had been widening for years. When the Red Summer swept across the country, Omaha became one of its most devastating flashpoints, and the violence that erupted there revealed the dangerous power of rumor, politics, and racial fear. The story began with a young black man named Will Brown. He was a quiet, soft spoken packing house worker who lived in Omaha's black neighborhood known as the Near North Side. On September 25th, a white woman named Agnes Loback claimed she had been assaulted. Within hours, newspapers seized the story, inflaming the city with sensational headlines. The truth was uncertain, but the accusation alone was enough to ignite a city already on edge. Omaha's political climate made the situation even more volatile. The city was in the middle of a fierce battle between reformers and the political machine that had controlled Omaha for years. The accusation against Will Brown became a weapon in that struggle. Newspapers tied to the political machine exaggerated the story, stoking fear and anger among white residents. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse demanding action, and by September 28th, the tension had reached a breaking point. That afternoon, thousands of white residents, men, women, and even children, marched toward the Douglas County Courthouse. They carried ropes, clubs, and guns. They shouted for Will Brown. They shouted for vengeance. Inside the courthouse, police tried to hold the line, but the mob grew larger and more violent. They set fires. They smashed windows. They shot into the building. Smoke filled the hallways as officers struggled to protect the people inside. Will Brown was terrified. He had already been beaten during his arrest, and now he heard the mob outside calling for his death. The mayor of Omaha, Edward Smith, tried to intervene. He stood before the crowd and pleaded for calm, but the mob turned on him too. They beat him, dragged him through the streets, and nearly hanged him before police rescued him at the last moment. By nightfall, the courthouse was burning. Flames shot through the windows. The mob stormed the building, overpowering the officers who remained. They found Will Brown, dragged him outside, and lynched him in front of thousands. His body was mutilated and burned. Photographs of the lynching were turned into postcards, a chilling reminder of how normalized racial terror had become. The violence did not end with Will Brown's death. White mobs rampaged through the Near North Side, attacking black residents and destroying property. Families hid in basements. Some fled the city. Others armed themselves, determined to defend their homes. The National Guard arrived the next morning, but the damage had already been done. Omaha had become one of the most infamous tragedies of the Red Summer. In the days that followed, the city tried to make sense of what had happened. Some blamed the political machine, others blamed the newspapers. But the deeper truth was that Omaha's racial tensions had been building for years. Black workers had been brought in as strikebreakers during labor disputes, fueling resentment among white workers. Housing segregation kept black families confined to overcrowded neighborhoods. Police brutality was common. The accusation against Will Brown simply lit the fuse. The tragedy of Omaha revealed how quickly a city could descend into chaos when fear and hatred were given power. It showed how political manipulation could turn a rumor into a riot. It showed how fragile justice was for Black Americans in 1919. And it showed how the Red Summer was not just a series of isolated events, but a national crisis rooted in the same forces: racism, misinformation, and the refusal to see Black humanity. Will Brown's story became a symbol of that crisis. He was a man whose life was taken not because of evidence, but because of fear. Not because of guilt, but because of the color of his skin. His death exposed the brutality that lay beneath Omaha's surface and forced the nation to confront the violence that had been allowed to flourish unchecked. Today, the memory of Will Brown stands as a reminder of the cost of silence and the danger of unchecked power. His story is part of the larger story of the Red Summer, a year when Black Americans demanded dignity and justice, and when the nation responded with fire. Omaha was one of the darkest chapters of that year, but it is a chapter that must be remembered. This is the story of Omaha, Nebraska. This is the story of a city consumed by fear, manipulated by politics, and scarred by racial terror. They tried to erase it, they tried to silence it, but we are still here, still telling the truth. If this episode challenged what you thought you knew, don't keep it to yourself. Push it forward. Start the conversation they tried to silence. This is Black Justice Untold. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe.